This Week in Agribusiness, serving America's most essential industry, is brought to you by Case IH.
Coming up on this weekend's broadcast, there's much more than just crop size that commodity analysts are watching right now. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this weekend's broadcast. Mr. Pearson alongside me here at the desk. And yes, we wonder how big these crops will be this year.
We certainly do, Max. That's one issue that analysts take into consideration. But increasingly, in a year like 2022, global factors are having a profound impact on the market. And analysts are looking at things like inflation, looking at energy prices, looking at things like wage and labor issues as we move into 2022. Dan Bassi recently had a chance to talk at the Land Pro LLC Fall Seminar, and he reviewed just how these events have gone, and he began by reflecting on this past year's moves in the market.
Last year, we ended this meeting as being resolutely bullish. We saw that there was inflation raging. We saw that the money supply was out of control in the United States. We saw the demand drivers of renewable diesel, which we talked about, Chinese buying corn, and that the United States was in this unique position to capture demand. Grain prices did make new highs. Livestock prices have made new highs. Farmland prices have made new highs. It's all about that, but today it's more unsettled.
That unsettled nature of the markets currently is impacting more than just the agricultural commodities. We're seeing its pressures spill out, and it's changing the way consumers behave. It's impacting their behavior, and it's driving strength or weakness in global economies.
We see the chances of a U.S. and world recession as rather likely next year. Central banks are going to raise rates, and unfortunately, a lot of the world will not be able to withstand that, particularly in the emerging markets. Now, we think that the Fed funds rate has to be 2% above the inflation rate. What is the natural rate of inflation these days? We still have supply chain problems emanating from countries like China and others. We have wage pressures, which we'll talk about a little acutely in terms of the lower end going forward. So as we sit back, we think the natural rate of inflation was in the last 10 years between 1.5% and 1.8%. We think it's now maybe 3 to 4.5%. But if you have to put the Fed funds rate 2% ahead of that to fight inflation, that means that we could see a Fed funds rate at 4 to 6%. That would put the longer term borrowing rate maybe at 5 to 7%. So these are the things that happen when you're fighting inflation.
And inflation was mentioned several times. That's an issue top of mind for a lot of producers as they look at the input prices on diesel and on fertilizer. It's also top of mind for the Federal Reserve. They'll be watching a broad basket of commodities, including food inflation.
Now, if you just look at food inflation, this is the U.S. food inflation rate. We are now just under 10%. This is where politicians are complaining today. This is the largest since 1977. This is something that most people haven't seen within a generation. And so as you think about inflation, this is really what grabs headlines. We'll get another data set next week, Tuesday, the 13th, but this will be carefully watched in terms of the U.S. Central Bank. They are very concerned about fuel and food prices and what it means to long-term inflation.
That's some of the data the Federal Reserve will be taking into consideration before their next meeting here in 2 short weeks, when the Fed's Open Market Committee will likely raise interest rates again. Dan was also keeping track of what's happening in the world of labor, as that issue is sticking around for some time.
We are now looking at where the U.S. will be short of workers to the tune of 500,000 to 2 million people every year. This will not change. Even with immigration, the border's wide open to the south, this isn't going to change. And with that, there's going to be real pressures on wages going forward. This is something that hasn't happened before in our generation. And so as I think about the future, you need to think about, number one, the chart on the left here shows you that last year was the first year we still grew, but it was only 0.1% as a country. Never before demographically has the United States seen its population decline one year to the next. We've always been growing. I think this may be the first year, this year or next year, in which the U.S. population actually declines as more of us dies than more of us are born. That's a big change. But on the chart to the right, you can see what's happening to labor costs. Economics 101, fewer people, more demand, higher costs. Labor costs in terms of inflation will not be dropping any day soon.
But it wasn't all bad news from Dan Bosse. As he looked at several of the upheavals over the past 2 years, there are some sectors of the ag economy that could perform very well. He identified one of them at the meeting.
The U.S. cow herd is in collapse. We are down to record low cow numbers. You can see in red here the change over change of the U.S. beef herd. And then when I look over slaughter levels, we have just been killing an immense number of cows. And then if you look at the heifer kill as a percentage of the total, heifers have not been immune either. So I'm not sure where the beef production engine will come from, but when we start holding back heifers to produce more calves in the future, there is one heck of a bull market coming in beef and cattle. We can see it, we can taste it, we know it's there, assuming consumers have the money to spend.
Well, our thanks to Dan Bosse there of Ag Resource Company. He was presenting in Morris, Illinois to the Land Pro LLC Fall Seminar. This portion of This Week in Agribusiness is brought to you by Firestone Ag. The Firestone Ag Dealer Network offers you the support, inventory, and resources you need. Visit firestoneag.com to find your local certified dealer. It's time to talk markets. Joining us this week is Ted Seifert, Chief Market Strategist at Zaner Ag Hedge. And Ted, this was a busy week in the commodity markets, thinking all the way back to last Tuesday when the trade opened. Soybeans were down big. What was the news out of South America that prompted that move lower?
Yeah, that was really coming from Argentina. So the Argentinian government has decided that it is going to allow exporters and farmers to get a much more favorable interest rate, or not interest rate, but currency conversion. To the tune of 35 to 37% better than what the actual conversion is, in order to get them to sell more soybeans through the month of September. They want to bring in U.S. dollars, but I also think that they want to compete with us during our major export season, and I think that they want to kind of draw out some of those reserve bushels that Argentina likes to keep, between 8 and 14 million metric tons, in order to keep against for a currency hedge. Well, this is giving them incentive to come out of that currency hedge, to take that better exchange rate and move a lot of bushels, up to $5 billion U.S. equivalent. That's about, at $14 beans, that's a little over 350 million bushel.
Wow.
That's a lot. I don't think the USDA has accounted for that much. I'm not sure Argentina will do that. But if they do, you would think that is going to cut into our export sales to some extent. And the thing about that is that even if it's 80 million bushels, well, that's a whole bushel off the yield. And, we're having this yield debate. That's what we've been talking about for the past few months. But the yield debate becomes less important if we're going to see some weakness in our export sales.
That's a great point, Ted. Thinking of that yield debate, though, supply and demand estimates from USDA coming out next week, where do you think yield's going to come up on this report?
I think corn's going to be lower. Just seeing what I saw out on Crop Tour and hearing what even the USDA guys have said, corn's coming down. It's just a question of how much. The trade is fairly conservative on this report compared to what some of the other numbers have been, some of the private guesses have been. But the trade expects the USDA to kind of stair step down. So looking for a 172.4 on this report. We'll see. As far as soybeans, we're just looking for a marginal reduction lower. It's basically back to the 51.5. That soybean crop conditions for soybeans, 57% good to excellent, is exactly the same as where it was this time last year, and we're looking for pretty much exactly the same yield. Yes, weather-wise, we haven't finished well out in the West, and you wonder if that yield number could come down a little bit further, but the trade doesn't think it's going to happen on this report. Neither do I. I'm a little worried that with these yield reductions, we're going to see bigger than expected reductions in demand and possibly some bigger carryover numbers than what the trade's looking for.
Ted, on the corn side, what have you been seeing out in the countryside with basis as we head into harvest?
Yeah, basis out in the West is starting to heat up quite a lot. Basis is actually still really rather strong for prices being as high as they are. But then you look at the export market, specifically for corn right now, although I wish we could see these weekly export sales reports, wait another week, hopefully. So you wonder how long that basis stays strong along the Gulf and at the port. You worry that over time the East and the interior start to suffer a bit But that west should stay fairly strong because that crop looks like, especially Nebraska, looks like it's a bit shorter than what we've seen in years past.
That's a great point, Ted. We're going to talk markets more with Ted Seifert, Chief Strategist at Zaner Ag Hedge, when This Week in Agribusiness returns. This portion of This Week in Agribusiness is brought to you by Firestone Ag. Harvey Firestone invented the first pneumatic farm tire, forever changing what it means to farm hard. Visit firestoneag.com to learn more about this history and tire solutions for today. We're back talking markets with Ted Seifert, Chief Market Strategist with Zaner Ag Hedge. Ted, I want to talk to you about the wheat market. Saw a big spike midweek following comments from Vladimir Putin. What did he say?
Yeah, no, basically he's not happy with the deal that they have to have wheat and actually just grain exports coming out of the Ukraine and the corridor, so to speak, because he says that they're not going to the starving countries of the world. I don't think that's really Vladimir Putin's concern. Humanitarian Putin is not really something that you think about, right? Yeah. I mean, that being said, it's a war, you know, and if he's going to find a reason to be upset or complain about something, he's going to. Ultimately, I don't know whether they start cruise missile attacking the ports again or not. We'll have to see. You look at a wheat chart, it's spent a really long time kind of basing out at these levels of support that we had, very strong levels of support they had before the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And you kind of feel like, all right, we went too high because of the short squeeze. The initial reaction was not fundamentally justified, in my opinion, and the market's kind of proven that out. But where do we go from here? Because now we've come down, we've completely erased that, and I don't think that's really justified either. So the wheat chart of everything, of all the grains, is the one that I think has some upside potential. The breakout that we saw to the upside looked pretty good. It might just be a fit and a start. We might not go straight up from here. But if I want to be long something in the grain complex, it's the wheat. All
right, Ted, energies have been top of mind for a lot of folks, both higher cost on the fossil fuel types and demand potential for the renewables. Where do you see, let's talk crude oil off the bat. Where's that going from here?
Yeah, you know, so this week was not a good week for crude oil, breaking out to the lowest level that it's been since February. And really, it had a very strong level of support around the $85 level in the October. It really wanted to hold that, just finally caved, and so that breakout to the downside. Now you have a longer-term trend line support here. You could have a near-term bounce, but more and more likely, it looks like the crude oil market's going to continue to go lower into the fall and winter months. And if that happens, that's not really a boon for biofuels. Now, yes, you can say if gas is cheaper at the pump, that might help the blend. But there's not as much of an incentive to blend high-priced corn or ethanol made from high-priced corn or biodiesel. So you worry about that if crude oil is going to continue to go lower. And you also look at crude oil as sort of an overall canary in the coal mine when it comes to inflation, right? And it really does feel like now that a lot of the stimulus or the direct checks going to people sitting on their couches, whatever, that's dried up. And with the drying up of the stimulus, you think inflation is going to cool off. Mm-hmm. And if inflation cools off, you kind of have a bit of a problem with these prices that are up at, you know, historically high levels, not record highs, but not too far off, really, because eventually you get demand destruction. And if inflation cools down, the products that we make with these raw commodities, those prices come down. And then we can't afford to pay the high-priced commodities. So again, demand destruction will at some point happen in earnest. It's just a question of when. And if inflation's cooling off, it might be sooner than later.
Ted, cattle certainly elevated at the retail level. Do you see some strength here as we end up in 2022?
Well, you know, a lot of that kind of depends on what happens with the stock market. It's looking really shaky, looking like it might want to go back to those June lows and possibly below that. If that happens, you worry about the domestic demand for cattle. Who knows what export sales have been in the last couple of weeks. I'd like to think that demand will stay good. I'd like to think that the stock market will stabilize and this is going to be a bit of a soft landing. But I don't know. There's definitely concern about that.
Definitely concerned about that. Lots to watch for in these markets. Ted Seifert, Chief Market Strategist with Zaner Ag Hedge. Thanks for joining us this week.
Always a pleasure, Mike. Thanks for having me.
Chad Colby's look at agriculture technology comes your way next, brought to you by the IBM Watson Decision Platform, combining AI with Internet of Things data to help agribusiness increase yields, improve quality, and drive sustainability.
Well, Apple's new product announced day every summer is a big day for our pal Chad Colby with the watches and the iPods and the iPhones. Let's see what he's zeroing in on this weekend from their announcement this week.
Last week at the Farm Progress Show, we got a first glimpse at a lot of amazing technology. You can see Raven right here in Case IH showing their autonomous auger cart display. Also, check out this robotic sprayer. Again, emerging technology is all around us. But for me personally, it comes back to that technology we use all the time. And this past week, Apple had their September launch of new products. The first one is the next generation of AirPod, the AirPod Pro. Now, I haven't seen these yet, but they claim twice the noise canceling, better fitment in your ear. You can have the ability now to adjust the volume with just a little swipe on it, which is really cool. Of course, they're always improving battery, which is outstanding, and they've got the functionality now where maybe if you misplace one of those little buggers, you can still find it. The case is even improved. It's a great new product, and I think many of us utilize that tool. Also, there are 3 new watches, and the watches got some pretty substantial upgrades this year. You know, in the watch, and I've been a good example of that, there's always that health application. They added a temperature sensor, which is a little crazy, but it will check your temperature every 5 seconds. They also added massive improvements to crash detection. This same new technology is also in the generation of iPhones that are coming as well. The crash detection doesn't matter which angle you're involved in an accident, it can detect that and alert the authorities. They also came out with a rugged new watch called the Ultra. It's more for scuba diving and things like that, but it has a longer battery. Pretty neat in terms of something revolutionary. And finally, there's 4 new iPhones. The 14, 14 Plus, the bigger one, the 14 Pro, and the bigger one of those, the 14 Pro Max. Lots of new features in these phones. One of them really intrigued me, and that's satellite connectivity for the very first time. You're going to be able to send out messages and location without the use of cellular. The Pro Model O looks impressive. I ordered mine on Friday, a 14 Pro Max, and I bet I'm not the only one on This Week in Agribusiness who's already ordered his new phone.
I know it's going to happen. He's going to call in a couple of days and he'll say, I have mine. Do you have yours? And the answer will be, no, pal, not yet. I'm going to try to put it off a little bit this year, Chad. Welcome back to This Week in Agribusiness. Well, the farm show season is still going on. It's not over yet. And we'll be going to Grand Island, Nebraska for Husker Harvest Days. We look forward to being there in the week ahead. That show running Tuesday through Thursday. A lot of equipment companies have something new to show this year, including Kloss. Some of the folks attending Husker Harvest Days will be traveling by that big Kloss operation there, not too far west of Omaha, Nebraska. Eric Raby is in that operation. Eric is Senior Vice President of the Americas for Kloss. He was talking with me about the new equipment they're bringing to the marketplace, and not all of it is big. Some of it is smaller than you might expect, such as their Class 7 combine.
I think one of the things that people look at when they look at the ag equipment industry is things just keep getting bigger, bigger, bigger. But when we took a really hard look at the market and understood that there is still a very significant portion of the marketplace that's not a Class 9 or Class 10 type of a customer, really they hadn't seen any technological advances from any of us in the industry. And we took the opportunity to look at that market segment very closely, and as such came out with the new Treon Combine, which we are very excited about, and the performance has been great. But it really does a great job of what we call fitting the farm for those growers who might want a Class 7 machine instead of a bigger one.
I saw that slogan, fits your farm. I thought it was very appropriate. What kind of a grower are you talking about? Who is it really modeled for?
Yeah, it's really looking at that, that corn belt, that Midwestern farmer who's running, in most cases running at least corn and beans, and in some cases maybe running winter wheat and then double cropping beans, so 3 crops a year. But really a farmer, owner, operator who operates the machine themselves, 1 machine, maybe 2 machines, looking for 12-row corn head capacity, 30, 35-foot flex draper head. But really someone who also may keep their combine a little bit longer as well. So it's really, again, I think an underserved portion of the market, but a very, very big part of the market too, that we're happy to be engaged with.
When you switch from one crop to another, I assume it gets easier, much easier than it was when we were boys on the farm when it was almost a half-day project.
Absolutely, yeah. Right now, we've got it down to timing a crop changeover in terms of seconds, not even minutes or hours. And most everything is done from the cab, so you can unhook your corn head and go right to your flex draper head. Very, very easy. And I think that's one of the things that, has come along through the years. As you said, it was a half-a-day job, and it's just too long to be switching heads.
Do you have all of the monitoring capabilities up in the cab that you would with a larger combine?
Absolutely. In fact, it is the same cab. We're also introducing a new cab on our traditional Lexion series, and the Treon model, the new one that we're talking about now, was the first machine to get the new cab. So it's got the exact same cab as all the other combines, and also the same monitoring capability. So you'll feel right at home and feel like you're in one of the best harvesting machines in the world, which is a Kloss combine.
And to switch from the Treon to the Axion, let's talk a bit about your new tractor offering.
Yes, we had the Axion introduction back in 2019, where we introduced the 8 and the 900 series. But what we've done is we've added two models, the 930 and the 960, with a TerraTrack option on the rear. So this is the first tractor in the industry to be what I call three-way suspended. So the front axle is suspended, the cab is suspended, and our track system is suspended. And it really makes for an extremely smooth ride across any kind of conditions you can encounter.
One can imagine it does make for a better ride, to be sure. Crop compaction, soil compaction, of course, is a big concern among growers, and I would imagine you're trying to continue to address that in this new horsepower range.
Absolutely. I think if you take a look at Kloss and the history of tracks on our combines, tracks on our forage harvesters, and now tracks on our tractors, it really does continue to help us tell the story of compaction, but also traction in less than ideal conditions. It really does do a great job at both of those. And from an efficiency standpoint, in terms of tractive effort, it really does help put that power to the ground. So in many cases, you might be able to run a slightly smaller tractor than you would with a wheeled version, just because we are better able to get that horsepower directly to the ground.
Nearly every hour we hear about inflation. That's in the news. And we suspect that you, being in corporate America, are challenged by the same inflationary factors that farmers and others are.
We are, definitely, and we really do closely watch that on the two fronts that you mentioned. Number one is on our front. I think one of the good things is we are starting to see some stabilization in pricing as it relates to steel, as it relates to freight, whether it's truck freight or ocean freight. Starting to see some stabilization in that. Labor costs continue to be high, and this extends not only to us, but also to anybody in the working world. Labor costs are continuing to be high. The other thing that we do watch, though, is farm income. And right now, the projections are that farm income is going to be falling next year, and we're really paying close attention to that and seeing, what can we do in this light of raising prices and things like that to kind of share some of that burden. And if you look at it from our reporting results that we look at, we are sharing in absorbing a lot of that cost as much as we possibly can.
Those supply chain issues, too, have been a challenge for Kloss, just as they have been for other companies. Eric Raby says it's not the electronics now the way it was at the outset, but it seems just about every day there is something that comes up in terms of sourcing, because they bring things in to make their equipment from all over the world. There's more coming up on this weekend's edition of This Week in Agribusiness. We hope you'll stay with us here.
This Week in Agribusiness, serving America's most essential industry, is brought to you by Case IH.
Welcome back to this weekend's edition of This Week in Agribusiness. Well, Mike, as folks are back in Washington to work on Capitol Hill, there are many issues they are tackling, including some of interest to the cattle industry.
That's right, Max. And one of those issues continues to be federal oversight, and the focus now is on emissions. A hearing in the Senate earlier this week took place on Senator Thune's Livestock Regulatory Protection Act. Joining us now to talk through what this act would do is Mary Thomas Hart. She's chief counsel at NCBA. And Mary Thomas, this is a bill that NCBA backs. What's the rationale for support?
Great question. So we were really excited to see the introduction of bipartisan legislation to protect farmers and ranchers from EPA regulation of greenhouse gas emissions. The bill is sponsored by Senators Thune, Bozeman, Sinema, and Kelly. So clearly indicates to the Senate and the rest of Congress that this is not a partisan political issue, that farmers and ranchers simply do not need to have their greenhouse gas emissions, methane emissions, regulated by the Environmental Protection Agency.
Now, Mary Thomas, is the EPA seeking to do this right now, or is this more a Band-Aid and prevention of future oversight and emissions monitoring?
Great question. So there is currently a rule on the books at EPA called the Greenhouse Gas Reporting Program. And this rule requires a laundry list of industries and facilities to report their greenhouse gas emissions to EPA. Now, one industry or facility included on that list is livestock manure management systems. We're not currently subject to that reporting because of an existing appropriations provision that defunds EPA's ability to collect those reports. But if we didn't have that appropriations language, then livestock producers would certainly be required to report those emissions. I think it's also important to note that after the West Virginia decision by the Supreme Court earlier this year, the EPA is going to continue to look for ways to regulate greenhouse gas emissions through the Clean Air Act. And as EPA continues to work through the Clean Air Act, we continue to see risk to farmers and ranchers.
That's a great point. With regard to the EPA's change since that West Virginia lawsuit, what else are you watching for here down the line from EPA?
I think, there's been a really heavy focus on other industries. So, coal-fired electricity production and energy production. But we know that it's a slippery slope, right? You attach regulation to one industry, and it's easy to kind of spread that regulatory burden to other industries up and down the supply chain. We also watch pretty closely the Clean Air Act regulation of ammonia and particulate matter, because often when an industry is regulated for one type of emissions, greenhouse gas emissions can be tied in to those permitting requirements. So we want to make sure that farmers and ranchers are never regulated by the Clean Air Act. That is an act, that is a law that was certainly not intended to regulate small farms and ranches across the country. It's meant to regulate smokestacks, and we don't have those.
That is a good point. Mary Thomas, this hearing this past week was in the Senate Committee for Environment and Public Works. Do you expect it to get a full vote in the Senate here ahead of the midterm elections?
We would certainly like to see a committee vote. I think that the bipartisan sponsorship of this bill shows the Senate that this isn't a political issue. This is far beyond that. And even if we don't get a vote in the Senate DPW committee, even if we don't get this bill passed into law, I think it sends an important message to the Appropriations Committee that we need to retain those provisions in the annual appropriations package that protect farms and ranches from Clean Air Act regulation.
That's Mary Thomas Hart, Chief Counsel at NCBA.
Greg Solier now brings us his farm weather forecast for the week ahead, presented by Pivot Bio Proven 40. Predictable, productive, weatherproof. Turn to a better nitrogen. Turn to Pivot Bio Proven 40. Learn more at pivotbio.com.
Now it's time to take a look at weather. Joining us in the studio this week is meteorologist Greg Solier. And Greg, out west, Pacific Northwest in particular, inundated with high heat and fire risk. Are they getting a break?
Yes, a relief in that weather pattern, relief in the form of a cold front. Yeah, we've seen one come through, and a more significant change in the weather pattern expected on its heels as the week wears on. Yeah, 95 to 105 all the way to the coastlines areas of the Pacific West last week and widespread across the Dakotas. But looky here, cooler, drier Canadian air and colder air across the western provinces. But we do have some warmth on the northern end of that ridge, and we'll get into some moisture. Matter of fact, some significant moisture with a deepening of the upper trough. Look at the U-shaped configuration here as it sweeps into the northwestern part of the country. Northern Rockies, the highest peaks, could see perhaps the season's first significant snow. And we'll get into some of that moisture as the week wears on into the western areas of the Dakotas. Obviously, 2 too late to matter on the summer crop scene. But again, from a dryness and drought standpoint, we'll take every drop we can get. And this is just the beginning. There's a series of these systems stacked up across the northern Pacific and Gulf of Alaska. So it is a significant and discernible pattern shift. I tell you, in the Atlantic Basin, just a couple of named storms. They've been well offshore of the East Coast. Looky here again, a low, the remnants of what was K in this colder California current. Yeah, flash flooding and severe weather has been the story and continues on early in the week across parts of Southern California, the desert Southwest, Imperial Valley, San Joaquin Valley, Palm Springs, and that moisture pattern in excess fashion with time over the southwestern part of the country. Otherwise, cooler, drier air breaks the heat again over the central and southern plains. The warmth beginning to build back across the northern Great Basin as the week wears on. This is a remnant feature, but it provides lift with additional downpours of rain over the southwestern part of the country. This big upper trough, cooler air into California with a couple of thunderstorms breaking out northward in the returning warmth across the Cornhusker state.
Well, Greg, there has been a little bit of a cool down across a lot of the Corn Belt over the past 2 weeks. It sounds like that might be coming to an end.
Well, at least early in the week, we have a fall feel. Later in the week, it is warmer and drier into the western Corn Belt. This is the remnants of some of this weekend moisture that generated some showers and thunderstorms, some goodly rain amounts over some of the still dry areas of the eastern Corn Belt. Wouldn't be surprised we pop a water spout or two over the Great Lakes region, and some of the thunderstorm activity has been generating some hail and a rush of wind. But again, drier air, milder air back west of the Mississippi River, especially as we get into the middle and late portions of the week. So we'll get some good crop moisture reduction, dry down, maybe a little early harvest. Nebraska leads the pack on certainly mature corn, but at a price because of dryness and drought. A couple of showers and thunderstorms up towards the Sioux, back across sections of Big Sky country, the middle to late portions of the week. Here is kind of the remnant feature of K, moving inland with showers and thunderstorms and downpours and flooding in the southwest. Cooler, drier, delightful air, and we need it coming off the heat and humidity, and harvest delays as well across areas of the Delta and southeastern states. The heat and humidity works back to the north later in the week. A leftover thunderstorm in the desert southwest and a little tropical system over the western Gulf with a couple of showers and thunderstorms into the Big Bend area of Texas later in the week. Mike.
Greg, going through the Ohio Valley all the way to the Atlantic seaboard, what do you anticipate this next week?
More drought relief. They've had their first significant rain in weeks, if not months, over the northeast of New England. But in the meantime, warm high pressure here. Here is that weather system early to middle parts of the week. Showers and thunderstorms and a significant fall feel, discernible change in temperatures there. That weather system over the late portions of the week moves into the northeast of New England. Good coverage rain here. Back to drier high pressure for the eastern Corn Belt and a warm up with lower humidity west of the Mississippi later into the week. Showers and thunderstorms widespread. The high humidity and the moisture slowing up early harvest across the southeastern states. But again, later in the week, cooler, drier weather across the Delta and heat back to the west. Lingering moisture across the Gulf Coast area, Atlantic coast, and down through Florida as well.
Greg Solier is back with his extended farm weather forecast for the country, presented by Pivot BioProven 40. Predictable, productive, weatherproof. Turn to a better nitrogen. Turn to Pivot BioProven 40. Learn more at pivotbio.com.
Let's look to the week ahead. Greg Solier is here. And Greg, you mentioned some precipitation in the forecast. Who's going to see what next week?
Would you believe at least tropical and hurricane related, well, at least in remnant fashion in the west and southwest. Good news, mind you, but again, downpours, flash flooding potential. Here's the remnant circulation as the week wears on over the southwestern part of the country. Easily 1 to 4, maybe more, and a couple of severe storms as well. Good coverage moisture later in the week, expanding across the west. Good news there coming off the heat humidity. Early to middle parts of the week across the Corn Belt. Later in the week, up to a half inch in the northeast of New England. Get some downpours over the southeastern part of the country. Here, maybe a little weakness. We'll keep an eye on the tropics. Otherwise, most of the active weather systems for a tropical weather season for the Atlantic Basin continue to be, Mike, well offshore.
Greg, looking out to the week of September 19th, does it start to feel like fall?
Not really. Here is the warm to hot ridge right here, and it's not done with, ladies and gentlemen, coming off some of the record-setting historic heat out of the plains and west coast. Maybe some records to be set here for mid to late September. Autumn begins on the 22nd, by the way. Cloud cover keeps temperatures a bit below average over the deep south. Normal in between. The warmth into the northeast and New England, where there may be some additional drought relief here. Maybe a little phasing of a couple of tropical systems. We're trying to get things going, but we're passing the peak season here by mid to late September. Drying out, we'll need it for crops to mature across the Corn Belt. Nice tug of moisture for the southwest and into the Pacific Northwest as the week wears on.
How about the end of September? Greg, what do you see as this month comes to a close?
Again, outside of a little snippet of some cool air like we're seeing this week, and we'll see this week across parts of the Corn Belt, not a lot in the way of any fall weather. Again, the warm to hot ridge relative to almost early October here, still capable of near 90-degree heat, mind you, as far north as the Canadian Prairie, at least into the 80s, into the western Corn Belt locales too. That's pretty much the story. Below average temperatures continuing on through Texas, the Gulf Coast, eastern states. So again, the warmth continues on. No real fall air in sight. In sight, moisture gain for the southern Canadian Prairie. Good news for across the Dakotas, the Pacific Northwest. Leftover monsoon set up here, and the showers and thunderstorms are tropical based over the deep south. More wet weather too for the eastern states, including New England.
Greg, what do you see for that first full week of October?
Again, the warmth generally continues on. A little slide farther to the east, a bit below average over the eastern states. Meanwhile, active weather pattern down south. Opportunities to dry out the crops across much of the Corn Belt.
Next on This Week in Agribusiness, it's Max's Tractor Shed, spotlighting another great American tractor.
So how far would you trailer a tractor? Maybe 7 miles, 70 miles? Some people will do that. Certainly not 7,000 miles round trip. Max's Tractor Shed is brought to you by Store Lock Tool Cabinets. You saw them at the farm shows. Maybe you need a little more detail before you pull the trigger there. Go to their website, storelock.com, to find out more. John Baum of Appleton, Wisconsin, loves Sears Roebuck tractors. Sears didn't make very many of them, to be sure. I talked about that a few years ago with a retired chief executive of Sears, Edward Telling. He was out walking his dog and came into the yard and visited with me about their tractors. He said, we didn't do too well selling tractors. That wasn't our thing. But it's John Baum's thing. He has 19 Sears tractors. And when he's not at Rantoul, Illinois in the summertime at the Half Century with his tractor, this was an off year, of course, for the Rantoul show, he trailered his Sears tractor all the way to Palmer, Alaska. 3,600 miles one way, more than 7,000 miles round trip. And he was hauling that 1939 Sears economy tractor all the way from Appleton, Wisconsin. I'm sure he had an enjoyable time. What's going to be moving across the auction block for Big Iron in the week ahead? Let's find out. Let's switch right now to Mark Stock for his weekly report.
Well, this upcoming week, folks, we'll be in Grand Island, Nebraska for Husker Harvest Days. We'll have a lot of equipment on display. We hope that you stop by and talk to the reps about machinery, land, livestock, and classic cars that will be selling throughout the winter months here on BigIron.com and on SullivanAuctioneers.com. We do have some outstanding equipment selling September the 14th. There's over 1,900 items that will sell to the highest bidder. G4L Properties out of Edgerton, Wyoming. They've got a 2012 Caterpillar D6 XL crawler dozer. They also have a John Deere 320D skid steer and a Caterpillar 140H motor grader. Shane Waters Estate out of Fowler, Kansas will sell 33 items. There's a Flex King 7x5 sweep plow. They've got a John Deere 9610 Maximizer combine. They'll be selling a 2013 Spray Coupe 4660 self-propelled sprayer. On September 15th, we've got a special auction for items that have been in storage for Pioneer Village out of Minden, Nebraska. 395 items, including a fuel delivery horse-drawn wagon and an auto horizontal stroke one-cylinder gas engine that's getting bids from all over the world. Go to BigIron.com for all the latest information.
The pipeline for agricultural leadership in this country looks good. Each week on This Week in Agribusiness, we like to highlight those young FFAers who are moving up in the program. And this week, we're talking with Isaac Hopke. He's the Wisconsin FFA State Secretary for this upcoming school year. And Isaac, what was it that prompted you to run for a leadership position?
Yeah, honestly, it was probably meeting a national officer last year in June, the first time I attended a state convention. I talked with him quite a lot, and he just really said that I would be a great state officer. And from there, it just kind of went on, and I decided to run, and I made it. So,
well, congratulations on your selection. You will be the secretary this upcoming school year. And Isaac, what are you excited about with this role?
Yeah, I'm just really excited to hang out with all of our state and meet new people and also grow as a person, not only just with myself, but also with our whole team. And I really just enjoy hanging out with them, and I really hope to just work towards a good future in FFA and also agriculture in general.
There's a lot of great people involved in FFA. And Isaac, as you think back in your years in the program, what has been a highlight for you?
Yeah, honestly, so far it has basically just been meeting all the people all around our state. I had the opportunity to attend many conferences as a normal FFA member. And then so far this year, we've also gone tons of places around the state. And we've also traveled all around the country so far, just meeting new people and new officers. And it's just an amazing experience meeting new people and leaders around our country.
That is fantastic. And Isaac, you're going to have the opportunity to do a lot more of that over this next year. We wish you luck as you serve as the Wisconsin FFA State Secretary. Thanks for joining us for This Week in Agribusiness. Ladies and gentlemen, this weekend, Max, marks the 21st anniversary since September 11th, 2001. It's hard to believe it's been that long.
The weekend of September 11th each year, we remember and honor those we lost in the terrorism tragedies, September 11th, 2001, including the farmer pilot who was at the controls of American Airlines 11, John Oganowski, who farmed in Massachusetts, whose brother Jim joins us again this weekend on the broadcast. Jim, it's great to see you once more.
Thanks again for having me.
How's your summer been on the farm in Massachusetts? It's been pretty doggone dry, hasn't it?
We've been in severe drought. We had our first significant rain over the weekend where we finally got 2 inches of rain, but a little bit too late, too little too late.
That field that is behind you, is that
normal?
That field that is behind you, is that a part of the Oganowski farm?
It is. It's where John and I grew up. My dad purchased this farm in 1948. It's been in the family ever since, and it's going to stay in the family for a lot longer.
What crops do you grow there?
Mostly hay. I grow about 10 acres of pumpkins in addition to a couple hundred acres of hay. I have an acre of peaches, half an acre of blueberries. Fall crops, we grow a lot of fall chrysanthemums, and our sales are just starting this week with chrysanthemums, the pumpkins, and all the mums.
You'll be busy in the weeks ahead, won't you?
It's going to be real busy for the next 6 weeks.
John took a very active interest in immigrants coming into farm in the United States, did he not? Wasn't he driven to help some of those folks from other countries, especially Cambodia?
He did. He started a program with the former Commissioner of Agriculture, Gus Schumacher, and some of those Cambodians are still farming on our farm today. They've been with us for almost 25 years now. Some of them are doing exceptionally well. You know, the agricultural climate in New England is significantly different than what they grew up with in Cambodia. One of them never used a tractor before. He used to use water buffalo to plow his fields.
John was also involved in Farm Bureau, wasn't he? I mean, he really took to heart some of the issues that mattered to farmers in Massachusetts.
He was very active in Farm Bureau, always getting involved with the local issues, very big into the land preservation, too.
That land has been set aside, has it not? A portion of it has been set aside so that it would never have any other use?
130 acres, it's all preserved. It will be open space, agricultural land for eternity, and we're pretty proud of that.
We want to get out there and see it sometime.
Oh, you're always welcome.
How's John's family been able to get along over all of these years? Certainly with a burden that just never, ever goes away. We think of them often.
Of course, with 9/11, just like the folks that lived through Pearl Harbor, there are daily reminders. So even though it's been 21 years, no matter where we go or what we're doing, there is a reminder of what happened on that day. So it's tough to finalize our grief.
Yeah, there really isn't any closure, I guess, is there, when you think about it?
That's correct.
What would you suggest to the rest of us, Jim? I mean, those of us who lived through it, or maybe those of us who've only read in the history books about it, but to make sure that we never lose sight of what happened and those who gave the sacrifice.
Well, if you look at the immediate aftermath of 9/11, our country was incredibly united. here we are 21 years later, and it seems like we are divided on every issue, and our elected officials can't find any common ground. So in hindsight, the fact that we were so united was something that I would like to see come back into the United States.
I think many of us would as well. Jim, we sure appreciate your time this weekend. So nice to see you again, and thank you for helping us remember John and what he has done for our country.
And you folks are always welcome to come out to Drake it.
We'll look forward to seeing you sometime in the future, sir.
Thank you.
Jim Ogonowski on the farm at Drake, Massachusetts, brother of John Ogonowski, who was the American Airlines pilot of the first plane commandeered into the World Trade Center. It was a bright sunny day across much of America that day, and we were all very tense as we think back to what happened on that morning all of those years ago.
Indeed, we were, Max. I remember it vividly where I was in a history classroom at Winterset High School.
I was in downtown Chicago looking up at the sky, wondering what would happen next.
Absolutely.
We all recall, and let us not forget. We hope you have a great week ahead. Join us again next weekend here on This Week in Agribusiness. So long, everyone.
Closed captioning for This Week in Agribusiness is brought to you by Kubota. Shape your world. This Week in Agribusiness is brought to you by Case IH. This Week in Agribusiness is produced by Omax Communications in association with 22 Creative Group. We invite you to visit us online at agbizweek.com.